Hey everyone, as shared last week, in this time I want to talk about 10 turn-based RPGs to get into the genre. In reality it's going to be more than 10, but details. However, this doesn't mean they are going to be easy entries. Personally, I don't like to treat people as dum-dums or incapable to finish a decent challenge. Also, do not expect to see hybrids or strategic games, aside from one entry and perhaps a narrative execution. But I'll explain things as we go. Of course, if you would like to recommend a turn-based RPG so others can check it out, feel free to do it in the comments down below. And there's no particular order. Without further ado, let's begin. I want to open the curtain with a series that I enjoy a lot, which is Shin Megami Tensei. And in a sense this includes Persona and Metaphor, because they pretty much were born from this IP. On this front, I do recommend to avoid the first entries a bit, because they are kinda niche and it can feel like a kick in the nuts. Unless you don't mind some old school ideas, but in general I believe the third entries to recent releases work well to get into turn-based RPGs. Where in general their stories try to share interesting philosophical ideas, where you can swing between law, neutral or chaos. At least with SMT, I haven't played Persona games aside from small parts of them. In any case, I do recommend to not get fits into a specific ending, if you really want to check if turn-based games are for you. Otherwise it can be a bit frustrating having to play with a guide on the side. At least for the first times, just follow your instincts, particularly because they can ask multiple things as you advance, slowly locking you into an ending. Perhaps the weakest story is found in SMT5, but Vengeance improves several things. As for Metaphor, that game has a completely different approach, at least regarding his story events, getting much more into a fantastic journey, with a dash of Persona, but in the end, there is a really good message. Now the gameplay is where things can get a bit intimidating. They want you to exploit every little weakness as much as possible. They don't want you to mess around that much into any battle. This is where the press turn system comes into play, where once you hit a weakness, you get an extra turn, being able to attack up to 8 times, unless your attack gets blocked, avoided or drained, being able to lose every turn. And that is where these entries get a bit harsh, because you need to update your strategy kinda constantly, having to reduce your weak spots as much as possible, while being able to attack with different attributes. In other words, demons will come and go quite constantly, because you have to fuse them or evolve them, depending from the entry. Then again, the only thing to keep in mind is that these games do not respect anyone. A bad ambush can end up in a terrible way, so use anything at your disposal. Aside from some items to recover MP, oftentimes those are the counted ones. Other than that, use Tooth and Claw. Be as unfair as enemies are with you. That is pretty much how you end these games. In the next spot, I would like to throw the 4 Heroes of Light approach. Not sure if it is a good idea to recommend that specific game, but at least when it comes to Bravely Default or Octopath Traveler, which follow a similar formula, for sure. Now stories vary on this end, because Octopath Traveler games aren't that deep, at least considering that these characters kinda stick with each other, but without a real connection in between, unlike the Bravely games, where there is a better cohesion. Worth mentioning that I haven't played Bravely Default 2 or Octopath Traveler 0, so I cannot talk about those games. Whatever the case, if you want a deeper story, just stick with the Bravely games. Just beware that there are some narrative moments that can be a bit annoying. Aside from those little details, their gameplays are really good as turn-based RPGs, following similar principles, where you can cover to get more turns for later attacks and or pretty much go all out. On this front, obviously, there are little differences, because in Bravely games you can pretty much burn turns since the beginning, while in Octopath you need to get them little by little. But that is the interesting thing, because everything is about managing turns and resources, deciding if it is worth saving some turns or if it is a good idea to break an enemy. Whatever the case, what's interesting is that these games do not treat you as a dum-dum. You will have to change strategies as you advance, combining jobs and specializing your gameplay to face different scenarios. That goes for both entries, because down the line there are challenges that will push your creativity to break enemies in a specific way. Just a word of advice, at least regarding Octopath. Some people say that it is grindy, but it is far from it. just rotate your members and try to balance your team. With that in mind, there are minimum grinding sessions. A group of Western RPGs that do wonders come from Larian Studios. That goes for Divinity Original Sin 2 or Baldur's Gate 3. Of course, they will fall into strategic RPGs rather than the traditional turn-based ones, but at least most Western RPGs I know either take an action approach, old school ideas like Wizardry, Ultima, or take the D&D route. So, I could recommend some indies, but plenty of them are kinda gimmicky. Bear with me on this front. Now, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3, probably in the future with some more time. But the deal with these games is that everything begins while creating a character that slowly shape everything around you, because interactions lead into different directions, and depending from your actions, things can radically change the course of the story, sometimes ending with the life of the greatest blacksmith, or perhaps having a weird night with a bear. And the choices are yours. What's worth mentioning is that these games want you to be as creative as possible. Always think out of the box, and exploit whatever dirty trick you can. Otherwise, some levels can be quite annoying. It is ironic, but I would recommend to study a bit these games and grasp some of the gimmicks like how to use the environment, skills that at first hand seem useless, and the kinds of routes you might have depending from your choices. Aside from that, it is all about practice and messing around for a while. An absolute must, at least for me, is Chrono Trigger. What is cool about this game is that the story is quite amazing. It's simple in some moments and really engaging in others. Also dependent from your actions because there are like 15 endings. Yeah, some of them are kinda similar, but others take completely different routes. On this front, I will keep saying that the definitive edition is the DS version, which includes the well-known Final Fantasy active system, where depending from the speed, characters will attack more or less times, as well as the cool beats from PlayStation, and extra content in case you want to play some more. Now the deal with this game is that it isn't that long, because you can finish it in like 20 hours, depending what you do, or dive way deep into really good challenges. What I love about this game is that there is plenty of content, but just if you want to give it a check, because they don't force you to look for them. However, up to this day I still remember plenty of amazing quests or tragic moments. The cool thing about this game is that you can combine attacks, which means having to wait other characters while receiving some hits, or deciding if it is worth going for a simpler skill. That active system does wonders in Chrono Trigger. A company worth checking out is Experiencing. Yes, there is a specific beat for those who want to get into the RPGs or first-person dungeon crawlers, but for refined wizardry-like ideas, this company has delivered some of the best DRPGs out there. So you can start with Operation Babel, Demon Gaze, or serious ideas like Stranger of Soul City, along other notes. Despite being DRPGs, the general difficulty is kinda normal, aside from Stranger of Soul City and Operation Babel, sometimes going out of hand with random boss encounters. Yeah, I know it sounds harsh, but you can find bosses while moving around. At least there are options to run away, but I won't deny that things can go out of hand. In any case, what I like about this game is that you need to create different characters to fulfill specific roles within the team. It is worth mentioning that there are some gimmicky ideas here and there, where sometimes these entries will push you a bit to bring strong combos. In other words, at first it is possible to finish combats without thinking too much. However, down the line, some enemies can recover a lot of HP, so either you end up breaking them or they end up chewing your team. Despite being on the normal side, in all of these games preparation is key. That doesn't mean farm like a masochist, but it definitely helps to have some decent equipment with some levels. In any case, battles are the least of issues in several cases. Sometimes the whole deal can be found in the labyrinth, throwing interesting puzzles or challenging layouts. Last year, plenty of things were said about Expedition 33, and yes, as a kind of interactive turn-based RPG with a western aesthetic, it does wonders. The story is really good, kinda predictable if you know a bit of French, or if you remember some famous animes or movies out there. In any case, there is an interesting tale, because since the beginning things look grim, and as they advance, this feeling doesn't really improve, there is always something oppressing in this whole crusade. Now, this RPG can be punishing in multiple moments, but I believe it is fair, because it throws mechanics little by little. Like, with this, you can avoid attacks. You can jump, parry normal attacks, or parry special moves. Yeah, I won't deny that later there are some enemies that maybe abuse the number of attacks they deal. Down the line, it is all about specializing your characters while using as many broken moves as possible. And a word of advice: if you find the kinda lazy boss late in the game, do not be overconfident. Some can own your arse real fast. A series worth diving into are the Trails games. It is fair to mention that the community is divided in different groups. Perhaps where most of them agree is with Trails in the Sky. Either you can play the old versions or the remakes. I am still pending to check the remake, soonish if things go well. The point is that down the line people debate a lot if it is worth playing Trails of Cold Steel or Daybreak. Maybe the Crossbell arc is another really good option. If you're interested, there is a bundle out there with both games. And yeah, in this particular case I do recommend to pre-order the game, because sometimes copies are kinda limited, and the people end up reselling these things for twice the price, or things like that. In any case, in my opinion, each story has highs and lows, where oftentimes they can be considered slow burns, as they tend to last for around 60 to 100 hours, depending from the entry. But if you really want to check an interesting world with an amazing cast of characters, sure, give them a try. The gameplay changes a bit from each entry, but the essence is similar. In these games, position and rolls matter quite a lot, as each move has a delay. In other words, sometimes it is better to save some time by executing simple attacks, while others it is better to go all out. Expect to see some nasty encounters, where you will be left with few hit points. For some reason, in some entries that was like the standard. Whatever the case, there are battles that will push you to be prepared, so always take some time to check each character move, as well as the customization available, otherwise some bosses will feel unfair. In Radiant Historia, we follow a character named Stock, character who finds the White Chronicle, book that gives him the power to go back in time to set things into the right direction. Part of the general premise is about the desertification and how it has advanced at a rapid rate. I could say that it is a really good story. Yes, I won't deny that some points can be a bit on the low side because you will see a lot of dead ends, but after a while this story gets better and better, slowly unraveling what happened here, plus having a nice cast of characters. On this front, I definitely recommend to play the 3DS release, because the post-content wraps the cliffhanger that was originally left in the DS. Its gameplay is quite entertaining, because you need to set up combos where turn management is really important. That way you can group enemies together and deal lots of damage. For the most part it isn't demanding. Sure, some fights will ask you to be kinda efficient, but there is a nice progression until you reach that point. In other words, it is not like from one chapter to another it goes bonkers. What's cool is that down the line different characters help to manage different setups, which turns quite interesting, as there are many ways to play around. Another great series of RPGs worth checking out are the Mario RPG or Paper Mario, at least the 64 or the GameCube. I haven't played the Origami one, perhaps in like 10 years in the future like I did with Xenoblade, I don't know. In any case, most of their stories are on the funny side, or I still remember them in a vivid way. The deal with these games is that they have active systems worth checking out, where in general you will have to press buttons depending from the characters or ways in which you want to defend yourself while receiving attacks. Needless to say that they feel like minigames, but more importantly, they are really short games, at least most of the times. So they are a super easy way to get into the genre, without having to digest saturated or complex stories. Some encounters can take a while, but at least there is no real need to farm in these games. Maybe 1 or 2 levels just to make things a bit easier. However, in some entries there are some hidden bosses for those interested. I am sure you will like to fight them. As honorable mentions, in the description I left some other turn-based RPGs I like, but I was a bit hesitant, either because of some gimmicks or because some can turn a bit annoying. And you will also find a link for the RPGs in case you're interested. So, seems like Dragon Quest XI was praised quite a lot back in the day. I haven't played it, so I cannot really say if it is for me, but it is another entry worth checking out if you want to have more options at hand. Other Western SRPGs worth checking out are Solasta, Crown of the Magister. The deal with this game is that you need to be quite creative, otherwise things will feel like a kick in the nuts at some point. Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous, can feel overwhelming because of the number of options, but if you don't mind to play along a guide, there are plenty of ways in which you can play this game, plus different options to ease the experience, in case you want to take things a bit slower. An indie I really want to check out is Look Outside. The only thing I have heard is that it is gimmicky as heck, oftentimes pushing you to use every item at hand. And to close the vid, Suikoden. There is an HD remaster that improved some things from the original releases. This game shares a story where war, politics, friendship, and family, in a sense, take important roles. They are games that place a good tone since the beginning, letting you know that things will be hard, once you check what you need to get the true ending. It can be a bit overwhelming. At least what is cool is that they aren't that long, unless you want to check more or less in depth what they have to offer. But if you rush a bit, it takes like 20 hours per game, and the gameplay is quite amazing, having different formations that will work in so many ways, depending from the characters you decide to use. It is also worth mentioning that this game has some strategic moments, sometimes being used as narrative elements. You'll get the idea if you play them. The point is that they are quite good. And with this, I hope you found this video informative, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.